Nature gives us so many analogies of how we can develop and grow a successful real estate business. Today I'm going to share with you some of the insights that I have that I know are going to help you grow your real estate business. I think the cycles of nature sometimes are the best teacher when we understand what it is that we're doing in our businesses to help them grow, the seasons we're in, the times where we have dramatic growth, and some of the things that we see on pretty consistent basis. We can really see some of those things in nature. I want to share with you this story today. My wife and I just recently celebrated our 25th wedding anniversary. We went out actually to the California coast, spent some time in San Francisco out on the coast, and then we spent a few days in Napa Valley. And Napa Valley obviously is known as really probably the winemaking capital of America, produces some of the most prestigious wines, some of the best wines in the country. And what we did is Tasha and I, my wife and I actually went out and we decided we were going to take one day, we went on a biking tour where we had these electric bikes. We went through some of the vineyards. We had someone educate us on the process. And as I was going through listening to this process, I was like, wow, there's so many of these things that reflect how we should be growing our real estate business. So what I want to do today is really go through and start sharing with you some of the things that the lessons that we saw, some of the analogies we saw, and how they can absolutely help you grow your real estate business. All right, so we begin this little bike tour and we pull the bike down and we leave the little bike shop and we pull almost immediately into this little kind of gravel road that's going through with a vineyard on both sides. Just gorgeous. You've got the mountains on both sides. We're sitting down in the valley, and the person who was leading us pulls down onto this little side road into the actual vineyard. Now we're seeing this in the springtime, so consequently this is right after the first growth is beginning to happen. Some of the things we're seeing now is little small seeds, or you can just see the little baby grapes, I guess you could say, in the clusters on the vines. But it's really beginning at the first part of the growth. And really she began to give us a history. And the first thing that she said, and the first thing I would like to apply to this is she said, you have to start to make great wine with great soil. She points down towards the end of the valley and she says, you see this mountain here, that is actually was an active volcano around 300 years ago that really filled this area of this valley with soils from all over the world. She broke it down, I believe she said either 11 or 12 different types of soils in the world, but because of this coming from the core and having that lava that came through and filling this valley, we can actually find a number, really one of the most amounts of soils, different types of soils from all over the world in this one valley. So she said you have to start with good soil. There's certain types of soil that grow certain things. So how I would apply that to your real estate business is this. What is the soil that you're planted in? I had someone tell me one time that, listen, if a flower's not growing, odds are it's not the flower, it's the soil it's planted in. A proper seed planted in the right soil is going to perform at a much higher level. Are you at the right brokerage? Are you at a place where you're growing? Are you at a place where you're being taught or you're learning and you're growing? Are you around other people? What is it that you're doing, and what is the soil that you're planted in? Is it a place where you can absolutely develop into all that you're created to be? So if we're looking at it from a business perspective, everything starts with your soil. Great seed planted in the wrong place is not going to bear as much fruit as it possibly can. Make sure you're at the right place. Make sure you're in an environment where you can grow, and that's really our first step, foundationally, to beginning to grow your real estate business. The next thing that the guide actually pointed out to us, which was kind of interesting, is she said you'll notice at the bottom of each of the great wine vines that are coming out of the ground is just about maybe a foot or 8 inches out of the ground. There's this knot at the base of each of the vines, and it looks like it's something that's different there. And the story behind this is that in the 1860s, when they began to start to grow some wine out in that valley, one of the things that they did is that of course they had the American stock type of vines, but they didn't make the fruit that they really wanted. They didn't make the types of grapes that were world renowned. So they began to have imports of the European vines, some of the things that were producing certain types of grapes, Cabernets, Chardonnays, whatever it was. They really, those vines and those plants that they had planted, those vineyards in France, in Italy, and Europe, really had better grapes. So as they began to plant those European vines, what they found was that there was actually an insect called phylloxera that actually would attack the roots of these European plants. It wouldn't attack these plants or the root stock that was from America, but it would attack those from Europe. So consequently, they could grow them for a little while, but they would die a lot faster. A grapevine produces quality grapes for an extended period of time, and these were much shorter. They would die off. And they began to wonder, now how can we possibly have the best wines in this area if we got a situation where we can produce the American vines, but they don't produce the great grapes? We can produce a few years worth of with these European great grapes, but we can't seem to do those. And what they began to understand is that actually what they could do, because the phylloxera did not attack the root system of the American vine, that they could take the American vine, grow it up to a certain level, and graft in those other vines from Europe. And actually what they did is they grafted those things together, and now they began to grow where those phylloxera could not attack that vine because it had the root system that had the strength of the American type of vineyard in the root system, but it had the fruit that was coming out of the vines with the tremendous types of grapes they were bringing from Europe. This became known as exactly what they have to do in every single time. If you're ever out in Napa Valley, you'll notice at the base of every one of those vines, there's a little knot system, and that knot system is basically where they grafted the two types of vines together. So the point that I came out with is who are you grafted to? What is it that you're doing? Who is it that you spend time with? Do you have a coach? Do you have a mentor? Do you have a group of people that you're around? Ultimately, you could be the best grape ever, but if you're not grafted to the right person, if you're possibly the best potential realtor, if you're not grafted with the right people, if you're not around the right people, you can't be all that you're going to be in the soil you're planted in. Who is it that you're tying into? Who is it you're listening to as a coach? What is it that you're watching as far as videos and content to help yourself grow? Who is it that's feeding into you? I had someone tell me one time that if you're going to give everything you can to all of your potential clients, you can't pour into someone else out of an empty bucket, so to speak. Who's filling your bucket? What is it that you're doing on a daily basis to make yourself full so that out of that overflow, you can then provide value to others? The third thing that was interesting is that they talked about the fact that, listen, there is no machinery that can affect grapevines, especially out in Napa Valley, because it's such a tender product. They don't want to shake it with a system where they would do certain things, or they don't want to have, machines that are affecting it. Everything has to be done by hand. And where they are in the process when we were there was they had these, basically they could see the vines that were going to have the clusters of grapes, and then they had the things that were the sprouts that were coming out. And we've noticed there were just hundreds of people in some of these vines. They were just going by and they were just picking certain things out of the vines. And as she began to explain this, what they called those is they would see certain parts of this new growth that was coming out of the vine where they could see that it was going to have a cluster of grapes. And then there were certain ones that had none of those clusters that were coming. And they called them suckers. We did this. We called this tomato plants when I was growing up. They called them sucker vines because they suck all the protein, all the nutrients out of the vine, but they don't produce any fruit. And they said by taking and pulling those suckers off of that line, what happens is now all of the nutrients are focused in on the vine and the portion of the vine that is producing the fruit. It gives them access to everything they need. As I began to think about my real estate career, I've had a lot of quote-unquote suckers hanging around that would just suck the nutrients, suck the positivity out of me, would take time and would give negativity, and that would just be things in my business that just weren't adding value, but they were taking the resources. Who is it for you? Have you got some people around you maybe that every time you're around them you don't feel better but you feel worse? Have you got certain people that aren't bringing things and helping you lift you up but they're maybe tearing you down? Really, if you're going to be all that you're going to be, the lesson in this is to make sure that we're constantly watching to remove some of the things that are not giving value to you. Whatever it is for you, make sure that you're taking advantage of every opportunity you have to remove the things that are not adding value to you, because by removing them, you're leaving more room for the opportunity to see more growth. One of the fourth things that the person who was giving us this tour really noted for us is that they noticed that there were these windmills out there and they weren't moving around. And there was a little bit of wind the day we were out there. And then also there were these, basically every single vine had a group and a little bit of water that was basically like a line that was running to drip water onto those plants when needed. None of those things were on while we were there, and we were just asking, well, what does this mean? Why do you have these? Is this like for power? And they said, no. What this is for is that when you have grapes, you have a certain amount of grapes that if they get too much water, I believe it was, they begin to get too much sugar in them. Or if they're too dry, they have too much acid. So what you need is you need to have a perfect situation where they control this environment. So if they get too much rain, they turn the turbines on, it dries everything out, gets it to the level they want. If they have a drought and they need more water, they have these systems that'll drip the water on the vines and make sure that they have the proper amount of water. They control the environment. Now the question becomes, in your real estate business, are you controlling the environment you're in? Are you taking the time to make sure that things are going in the direction they should go? Are you getting to a place where you're spending too much time spending it on activities that you could hire someone to do that's keeping you away from spending time with people? Are you at a place where maybe you need to turn on those turbines, so to speak, and dry things out a little bit? Maybe that looks like maybe you're just reacting instead of being proactive in your business. Maybe you need to time block certain time to make sure that you're out there doing your prospecting. Maybe it's that you need to block out certain time to learn more, to grow more, to read more, to be coached. Whatever it is for you, when you control your environment, all of a sudden now, by controlling the environment, you get the best results you could possibly have. Notice what they did is we can't control what's going on around us, but what we can control is the way that we react to those things and how we add value in those situations, and making sure that we control it instead of reacting. The fifth lesson she taught us was that they have to prepare for the harvest. There's a certain time when these grapes begin to get ripe, so to speak, that if you harvest them too soon, maybe you don't let them fully develop. If you harvest them too late, maybe they begin to crack open, or they don't produce in the way, and they've gotten past their prime, so to speak. So what they do is they prepare for that in the way that they have people lined up that will be able to go out and pick all of the grapes when the time comes. They have people that can process the grapes. They have already bought the barrels that they will put the wine in once, so that it can begin to ferment and become wine. They have all of these things in place before the harvest ever comes. As I began to think about that in my real estate business, there have been times where I wasn't prepared for the harvest time that was coming. So for instance, I had certain times where I wasn't prepared to be able to handle 10 transactions at one time. What I began to do is to realize that I needed to have someone in place to be able to do a transaction coordination for me before I had the 10 transactions, so that I could make sure I was doing that. I began to understand that when I started overloading everything and I began to focus on really just loading people into my database, I was collecting leads, but I was neglecting leads. So what is it that you need to do to prepare for your growth now so that you're able to take advantage of it? If you're preparing to be a listing agent, put your checklist together so that when that listing comes in, now you know exactly what the steps are and you can continue to move in the right direction. You're not just reacting. Maybe you're someone that needs a process, a checklist, so to speak, after you have something go under contract to make sure you don't miss things throughout the transaction. Maybe you need a transaction coordinator. What are the foundational pieces you need to put in place now for the harvest that's to come? The sixth thing that she discussed was that every single year, even if they've had the best crops they've ever had, they go in and they prune the vines back to the foundation, basically vine that is coming up. What they found was if they didn't go back and they pruned those vines after the harvest, the next year, those vines were a little old. They were a little tired. They could produce fruit, but it was going to be dissipated, and the new growth would actually produce more. One of the things that gets so hard in our business is that we have certain things that we've always done that are producing results for us, and it's hard to move away from those things. I just want to encourage you. Take a look at your business. Where did your business come from? Do an evaluation of where your business came from in the last 12 months. A lot of times what I found personally in my business was I thought that I was buying all these leads because I was generating business from that. When I really did a deep dive a few years ago about basically where was my business coming from, I began to identify that, listen, I was buying all these leads, but I was only closing just a few. It was only accounting for about 5% of what I was doing as far as my production, but I was spending an inordinate amount of time just thinking I was doing something to add value and add new leads and have fresh opportunities. But when I began to look, the things that I was really not focusing in on, which is having lunches with past clients, making sure I was communicating with my sphere of influence, driving those relationships deeper so they could end up taking my business wider, all of a sudden I began to realize that if I shifted the focus of all the time I was spending on online leads to those relationships I already had and taking them deeper, that my business would grow. I want to encourage you. What is it you need to prune out of your business? What is it that you need to cut out that you've just always done that's just not producing any fruit anymore for your business? What is it that you believe works, but really what you're doing is you're spending an inordinate amount of time for a very small amount of results? You see, what we have to understand is that new growth can't happen until we prune what we've been doing. What is it that you need to focus in on that you may need to cut back on to make room for that new growth? The seventh thing that she taught us right before we left that vineyard is that the true winemakers that make the best wine, they have to understand and trust the process, and they have to be patient. Literally, great wine doesn't happen overnight. It takes time. They have to trust that once they've done everything that they need to do and they have placed that into those barrels, that they begin to age, that they trust the process, that this is going to become the wine that they desired to make in the beginning. They have to be patient. They can't take the wine too early because in reality it's probably going to not be everything it could be. They have to make sure that they're patient enough to understand that what they're doing today is going to generate the results into the future. Our real estate business is so much like this. Literally the things that you're doing on a day, the things that you're doing today, the calls you make today, are probably not going to see results where you're going to get paid on them for maybe 6 weeks, 8 weeks, even out to 6 months into the future. But you have to trust the process. As long as you continue to add value, you have to understand that in the future you're going to reap the harvest and you're going to get the results that you're looking for. So what is it that you're being impatient with? What is it that you're not trusting the process with? Is it something where maybe you're looking at this and you understand and you trust that if I have a certain number of conversations, I'm going to get a certain number of transactions, but are you taking the effort and making the effort on a daily basis to make those calls, have those conversations, understanding that it's not about what happens today, it's about planting the seeds and trusting the process that the harvest will come. You see, when we understand the process of making fine wines like she explained to us, and we understand how nature gives us so many glimpses at how we can grow our real estate business, and we begin to apply these to our business, we can't help but see our business grow. I hope this has been helpful, and I'll talk to you soon. Thanks for watching the video. I specifically chose the video below for you because it builds on the one you just watched. I hope it's helpful, and I'll talk to you soon.